Welcome to the Ortega Path to Enlightenment. My name is George Ortega, and this is episode number 17, Means to Enlightenment Focus. Okay, we're recording this on August 22nd, 2017, and this is a series about the topic of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? How does one become enlightened? How does one become more enlightened? And so today's topic is kind of like an obscure topic within enlightenment. It's not something you hear about too much, but when you think about it, it's really very central to enlightenment and how to become enlightened and all. In other words, like in meditation is probably the fundamental technique for enlightenment. The purpose or the way of meditation is always about focus. When one is meditating, one is always either focusing on an object like one's breath or a mantra, or focusing on just being mindful, like as in mindfulness meditation, being mindful of one's thoughts, one's emotions, one's surroundings. So focus is central to meditation, but focus extends much, much more to the rest of one's experience. Basically, what we focus on is really what determines our consciousness from moment to moment, and what determines our consciousness from moment to moment really determines our I guess level of consciousness. We're kind of like assuming that as we evolve as human beings, we both collectively and individually evolve to higher and higher levels of consciousness. And so like this concept of enlightenment pretty much denotes a higher level that we're all, again, striving for. I think it's like biological. It's in our DNA. In addition to seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, trying to always do what's good, we're always trying to become more evolved. All right, so in this episode, I'm going to go through some of the things that are most important to focus to focus on. Okay, and I've said this before, and it's so quintessential to happiness. Or to enlightenment. The number one aspect of enlightenment is happiness, and that's because happiness is really the point of everything. I mean, that's why we're here. That's really our deepest, our really only goal. And anything else we pursue in life is an effort to stay happy, to not lose our happiness, and to become happier. So, okay, with that in mind, if we want to focus on our happiness, first we want to kind of like focus on that realization. We want to keep that in mind, that happiness is what life is most about, so that when we're going through our day-to-day activities, we don't get distracted by seeking goals that we believe are important to our happiness. But more often than not, what happens is we get stuck pursuing these goals and forget about why we're pursuing them. We'll have these long-range goals, like to become very successful in business, make a lot of money, or to basically get recognized for some achievement, whatever. A lot of this has to do with pleasing people, trying to kind of like win people's approval and all that. And, basically we get distracted by this. We lose sight that anytime we do anything, it's for happiness. So like that's the first thing we want to maintain our focus on. But all right, within happiness, all right, fine. We understand that happiness is the most important aspect of enlightenment. There's certainly others like goodness and all. We'll get into some of these later. But so like with happiness, once you get that that's what life is about. That's what you really want. And anything else that you want, you only want it because you believe it's necessary to your happiness, or you predict it's going to make you happier, or the people in your life, the people you care about, whatever. So, in terms of the happiness, what you really want to focus on the most, and I've been learning this, especially over the last 2 years. I mean, I've worked on my happiness for several decades. You know, I did a TV show on it back between 2003 and 2006. I recorded about 138 episodes, and there are so many ways to be happy, to become happier. But in my personal experience, what I've found is, I think by far the most effective is to smile. I mean, basically, you know, like there's a lot of research on the smile where, you know, basically they've demonstrated you don't even have to like intend to, well, I guess you have to, no, you don't even have to intend to smile. You know, in one experiment, they put a pencil between a subject's teeth, so they're not even trying to smile. But what happens is when we smile, it physiologically gets us in touch, focuses on us on this feeling of happiness. So the smile, you know, what I've discovered personally, by far, it's the most important thing you can do to become happier, and it's, you know, it's therefore the most important aspect, I believe, of enlightenment. What happens is, like, you know, enlightenment is also very connected with goodness. You know, the more enlightened we become, the more virtuous we become. But it's important to first, you know, achieve that happiness, because to the extent we achieve a personal fulfillment, you know, to the extent that we have what we want, this happiness, then we can, you know, goodness to a great extent, it's about being good to ourselves, but it's also, for the most part, about being good to the world, being good to like other people, to animals. So it's important to focus on this happiness first, to kind of like try to master it as much as you can. So, all right, so like, you know, what I've discovered is that simply by smiling, and when I say smiling, you want to focus on it like you do, like you might focus on your posture. You know, we're taught to like sit up straight, to walk straight, you know, shoulders back, whatever, you know, spine erect. And this, you know, incidentally, this they've experimented on this. They've done experiments where they've demonstrated that when people slouch, they don't feel as good emotionally. You know, so just in the same way that, you know, sitting and walking up straight, you know, helps one to feel happier, smiling, you know, also helps one to feel happier. So that's, you know, I can't overemphasize this. And the reason it's so amazing, I think, it's because it's so simple. I mean, there are so many ways that we seek happiness. We seek happiness, our main source is through other people, through achievement, through being optimistic. You know, there's a lot of things we do to derive our happiness, to feel happy. But again, in my experience, to cultivate the habit of smiling as a part of your posture. And when I say smiling, I don't mean like, you know, baring your teeth, you know, kind of like a grin smile, you know, whatever. I mean like a closed mouth, pleasant facial expression. And I mean, in my experience, you know, the stronger the smile, the more powerfully it evokes the feeling of happiness. Now, like, you know, in our culture, you know, since this isn't something that's very well known, which is one of the reasons, you know, I guess I'm doing this show, to kind of like help people understand this. In our culture, part of this is, I think, comes from our roots in Britain, which, you know, the English people aren't the most expressive people in many ways. But basically in our culture, we just, you know, to smile, you know, to beam with happiness, whatever, wouldn't be so quote unquote appropriate. fine. So you might want to like, tone it down a bit when you're in public for the sake of other people. But again, like the key is to focus on your smile moment to moment, really from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. And ideally, if you can, I haven't worked all that much on this, but I should, to try to actually like smile, have this posture of a pleasant facial expression even while one's sleeping. That probably would lead to more pleasant dreams. But all right, so you want to like, what you want to do, since, I mean, if smiling as posture was part of our culture, we wouldn't have to work on this. Our parents would have like taught us this, and everybody'd be smiling. And since we kind of like mimic each other's emotions, facial expressions, we'd get it. But since we're not there yet, we have to work to essentially make this pleasant facial expression habitual, to commit it to habit, to have it be, to extend our posture to include this pleasant facial expression. All right, now, so like, all right, this is unfocused, but like the smile is so important, to happiness, therefore to enlightenment, that I thought, it was important to spend a good amount of time on it. But all right, so you're smiling. The next, I think, major area of focus is what happens in life is we start doing something. And I'm not very good at this actually myself. I'll start working on writing something and or working on the computer doing some research, and I will forget to feel happy while I'm doing this. Part of the fault for this is I think in our school system, they don't teach us. They teach us how to like read and write and do math and all that stuff, fine. But they don't teach us how to like really enjoy doing it, and it wouldn't be so difficult. So anyway, we have to kind of like struggle with this. And what happens is like we're basically struggling to maintain our focus on what I would suggest is direct happiness. Okay, yes, you can be happy working on a project, seeing it, succeed, going step by step, with the goals. You can be happy kind of like being with people, being entertaining people. But it's wiser, in a certain sense, to kind of like separate your happiness from these activities. It's not like you're rejecting these activities and people as sources of happiness, but you're essentially focusing on what you can most control. You can't control a lot of times the outcome of projects, of how other people will behave, but you can certainly have more control over how you feel, what you focus on. So basically, you want to focus on feeling happy. This is in addition to the smiling. So what happens, you smile, and again, that's going to naturally evoke the feeling of happiness, but you want to strengthen that. You want to like augment that with focusing not just on the smile, and I mean literally, physiologically, you kind of like focus your consciousness on your smile, but you also want to focus on that feeling that smiling evokes. And you'll notice that a lot of times, I lead a lot of groups on happiness in Manhattan and here in White Plains, and we discuss happiness. A lot of times I'll ask people, what is happiness? And people will say, well, it's like other people make me happy, or music makes me happy and all. And what I try to kind of like get people to understand is like there's a difference between the experience of happiness and what makes us happy. So in other words, one of the things that makes me happy is I like to be with people. I like to hang out with people and all, right? But that's just the means to happiness. That the happiness is really how one feels when one is with people, when one is doing something, and in this case, when one is purposely, intentionally, attempting to feel happy. So all right. So basically, what we want to do is focus on this feeling of happiness directly. Don't focus so much on what's causing it. You want to be grateful. I'll get to this later, but that's the key. All right, so like, since this is about enlightenment and it's not just about happiness, goodness, ethics, virtue is also very important because, well, actually, I mean, like, it is about happiness. Again, everything is about happiness. You can't escape that. So what is virtue? What is goodness? John Locke gave a definition of this, and I have a feeling the Greeks understood this too. Basically, goodness is what creates happiness. Okay, John Locke defined that. He was I think a 17th century British philosopher. He said, what is good is what creates happiness, and naturally, so if you want to be good to yourself, the first thing to do is make yourself much happier. Work on your happiness. But goodness, generally to a great extent, means our behavior toward and about other people. In other words, like we live in a civilization where we all contribute. There are so many benefits we get from other people who do various kinds of work that perhaps we're not good at or we can't do. And like collectively, we get so much more done than if we were like each individually just working on everything ourselves and not like relying on this collective, collaborative, cooperative effort. So, goodness to a great extent is about helping others to become happier. And so like that naturally is going to depend on our circumstances. If we're raising a family, we want to certainly be sure that our family members, our wife and kids, whatever, are happy. In a community, we want to kind of try to, work for the happiness of the community. But also it extends, goodness, you want to focus on the world, of the wider world. I mean, like a few hundred years ago, it was pretty impossible to do this. It was pretty impossible a few hundred years ago for somebody, for example, here in New York, to have any influence on somebody in Asia or in South America or Europe, whatever, right? To a great extent. But now there are so many ways to influence people who we don't know, we may never know. And so for example, thinking about addressing, working on global poverty. And it's not just, again, like about people, it's about like animals as well, becoming a vegan, stopping eating animals because of the way they're treated. All right, so you want to focus on what's right. You want to focus on goodness. And let's see, what else? So, all right, we don't have that much time. I'm going to skip over through some of this stuff because basically, all right, let's get to all right, we want to focus on our happiness and goodness, and I was going to go into more detail, but we only have about a bit over 9 minutes. So let's explore these grand concepts, okay? We're here, all right, so we're here on this earth, right? And let's say, we're very fortunate, decades, centuries ago, millennia ago, people would have to really struggle to survive, to just get their basic needs met, but we here, and especially in the richer countries, we don't have to worry about that to a great extent. Our mind is freed up. In other words, we don't have to spend our days foraging or hunting, to eat whatever. It's much more simple, and so basically, what that means is we don't have that much to worry about. We don't have to worry about being attacked by wild animals, things like that. So that creates a challenge. So if we have this. We're always aware, okay? If we're going from day to day, we're going to have thoughts coming into our mind. And again, what this episode is about is to be able to control these thoughts, to focus on what is most wise, to focus on what's most ethical. But that's, what happens is let's say we work on our happiness and we work on our goodness, and we're pretty satisfied that happiness, you can always work on it more, you can always get happier, but let's say we're relatively happy with our level of happiness, and we're doing as much as we can, let's say, for ourselves and other people, for people in our life, and I guess we can always do more in that area also. But the point I'm trying to make is during times when our mind, we don't have anything that we have to do. People work 8 hours, they go home, they might have to like cook dinner or do a few chores, whatever. Then I think the average person watches, I think, television like 5 hours. So actually, that's what a lot of people are doing. And if, I don't watch TV, but I'm on the computer a lot. So like, but we have this free time to devote to whatever. And again, in relative to enlightenment, the question becomes, what do we want to focus on? What do we want our consciousness to be aware of? Okay, what I think, again, we've kind of like, aside from happiness and goodness, which are the central themes, I think what we want to focus on is this concept of God. Okay, because like, first, like 80 to 90% of Americans, for example, believe in God or a higher power. It's pretty, some people say you have to believe that God exists. You can demonstrate it. I've done shows on this. Like if you define God as all powerful, well, the laws of nature are all powerful. You find God as everything, well, everything exists and all. So, but the idea is like, we have this spiritual component to us, and this is very kind of like central to enlightenment. Enlightenment isn't just about, becoming very happy and very good. It's about kind of like understanding who we are. And one thing, when we delve into who we are as a humanity, as individuals, we learn that nothing that we do is up to us. We don't have a free will. If you have any doubts, the last show I did before this, I did for about 5-6 years or whatever, 212, I believe, episodes, all just demonstrating why we don't have a free will. So actually, nothing we do is up to us. And so, basically, everything we do, including working on enlightenment and our happiness stuff, is really up to God. God is like, in God you can define it in various ways. God is kind of like, the creator of the world, this big bang universe. God is what is everything and what controls everything. So that's in terms of like what you might want to be aware of, this is probably something that's very wise. The idea is like to not see yourself as the author, to kind of like understand that there is this being that we're a part of. Like, for example, in terms of free will, I have a hand. My hand writes and does stuff. Nothing that my hand does is up to my hand, okay? It's all up to my brain, and nothing is actually up to my brain. It's up to the God, God who makes everything that happens happen. That's what being all-powerful is about. That's what omnipotence is about. So the idea, all right, so, again, we have this spiritual part of us that sometimes we get so mired in the mundane that we ignore it. We don't pay sufficient attention to it. But it really, I think it helps us to understand what our life is about. Somebody once said that life, I think it was Thoreau or Emerson, I don't know, life unexamined is not worth living. I wouldn't go that far at all. One, like, in other words, if you're striving to be happy and you succeed at that, then I don't think you have to understand anything else. But it is, that being said, relative again to enlightenment, it's a good idea to kind of understand who we are. So, for example, like we think we know this reality. Oh my God. Basically, according to physics, and this is like not at all controversial. Well, there's a little controversy, but not much. There's a wide consensus. Basically, this reality that we're aware of comprises just 5% of what's out there. Okay, this matter, mass, energy, stuff we can interact with through our senses, through our technology. But then there's another 95% of the universe that we know it's out there because it exerts a gravitational pull, and I think there's a few other ways we understand that we can interact with it, but we don't really interact with it. Like, aside from this very weak gravitational force, but it comprises 95% of what's out there, and we refer to it, out of ignorance to a great extent, because we have no idea what it is, as dark matter and dark energy, okay? But that's all we know about it. So in other words, like, you know, when we think about God, we probably want to think about the essence of this reality, that it's so much more, just like, for example, a good example is the electromagnetic spectrum, that, you know, you have like X-rays and gamma rays, and then you have this visible light. And I mean, the spectrum is like so wide, right? But the visible light component is extremely narrow. In other words, like what we can see, you know, through sunlight and stuff is a very extremely narrow part of this, you know, spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. And that's the same thing about our reality. So basically, I've only got about like a minute and a half. So like, you know, we want to focus on God to understand most fundamentally who we are, you know, what our spiritual sides. I got to do shows on this, like basically Princeton, Duke, Stanford, these major universities have done research, for example, on clairvoyance and telepathy, and clairaudience and all. And, you know, these people don't believe this stuff exists. It does. It's just like, you know, our world isn't ready, just like our world isn't ready to really accept that we have no free will, because we need to like believe we're in control of stuff. Too many people are a bit freaked out by the fact that stuff happens in our reality that we have no idea how it happens, and this is a part of it. All right, we're running out of time. You know, we could also like focus on love, on non-attachment, on oneness, on death, and on reality. But that's the idea. In other words, like, focus, you know, what we focus on is what determines our consciousness. What determines our consciousness is what determines the quality of our life. So after we focus on being happy, becoming happier, being good, then, you know, like, we want to focus on God. We want to focus on understanding the nature of reality. And as we do this, we will either become enlightened, or if we're already enlightened, we'll become more and more enlightened. And so eventually, like, the entire world is going to be entirely blissed out, completely virtuous. Thanks for watching.